Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Well, the big event next week is going to be the NATO Summit in Vilnius. And I thought, dear viewers and listeners, that as you have been so faithful to the Keeping an Eye series over the past weeks and months, that I would give you a sneak preview today of what's going to be on the agenda for that summit in Vilnius and what some of the decisions and outcomes are likely to be. Well, one thing, fortunately, that the 31 NATO allies don't need to wrangle over or worry about is who is going to be the next NATO Secretary General. I well recall when I was at the NATO summit in Strasbourg in 2009 that the wrangling over the appointment then of Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the Prime Minister of Denmark, as Secretary General, overshadowed nearly all of the proceedings. Fortunately, that's not going to happen in Vilnius because just yesterday, the Allies decided unanimously to reappoint Jens Stoltenberg as Secretary General for an extra year. This makes sense because clearly NATO is going through very testing times with the war in Ukraine and with the need to reinforce its eastern flank. And you don't normally change the captain on deck in stormy weather. And Stoltenberg's continuation in the job has certain advantages. He knows the dossiers, he's very experienced. He has become an effective advocate for assistance to Ukraine, particularly in the military sphere, also for higher defense spending. And he's got good relations with President Erdogan of Turkey, which is particularly important at the moment, as the Allies still need to convince Turkey to go ahead with the ratification of Sweden's membership of NATO. At the same time, one has to be frank and also say that one of the reasons why Stoltenberg has his final extra year is that allies were not able to agree on any of the other names that were in the fray, such as the Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, or the Defence Secretary of the UK, Ben Wallace, and a host of others. And to some degree, the extra time will probably be good for the allies, not just to sort of debate the merits of one name against the other, but in my view, much more importantly, and looking at what the private sector would call succession planning, to think, about what kind of alliance they want for the next decade, what kind of image they want to present, what kind of audiences, not just in the West, but globally, they want to reach out to. And having defined the profile of the job, then hopefully it will become more easier to decide who is the right person to fill that particular profile. Does it have to be a woman? Because NATO has never had a female Secretary General. Should it be somebody who has been a prime minister, as the two previous NATO Secretary Generals? Should it be somebody from Central and Eastern Europe, somebody from Southern Europe, from an EU country, or from a non-EU country? Clearly, the Allies need more time to settle all of this. So the thing that will definitely be on the agenda in Vilnius is collective defence, and firstly, the approval of the standing defence plans that the Supreme Allied Commander, General Chris Cavoli, has been working up. They run to 4,000 pages, and which for the first time give NATO a very detailed campaign strategy for how to defend its territory should Russia or anybody else, but particularly Russia, be so reckless as to launch an attack or an aggression. What's important about these standing defence plans are three particular things. Number one, they give, for the first time, each ally an assigned role and task. So there's no longer the possibility to hide behind somebody else. Secondly, they will gear future NATO exercises to the implementation of the standing defence plans, which will make those exercises a much more reliable benchmark of how ready NATO is to actually fight. And thirdly, as soon as these defence plans are approved, the Supreme Allied Commander will go around to the various NATO member states to start generating the forces that he needs to implement that plan. And this will be an early test of whether allies today have the right soldiers, have the right mobility, have the right equipment, and are able to mobilize not in 6 months' time or in 1 year's time. That's far too late, but immediately. And on the basis of that gap analysis, NATO planners will have a much better idea of how they should put pressure on individual allies to step up to the mark. Another issue for collective defense, and one which I mentioned that Stoltenberg has championed, has been defense spending and whether to have a higher level of ambition for defense spending, making the 2% of GDP no longer the maximum. You get there and you can sort of more or less slacken your effort, but the minimum, the floor on the basis of which you build further. Now, today, only 7 or arguably 8 allies meet the 2% benchmark, so you may think that it's not particularly realistic for NATO to then have an even higher level of ambition, at least on paper. But looking at the US presidential elections next year and the big efforts that the United States has been making for NATO and Ukraine recently, I personally think it would be foolhardy for the European allies not to send for Washington an important signal of Europe's willingness to take on a greater responsibility in the alliance. The third big issue, unsurprisingly, is Ukraine. President Zelensky has still not confirmed that he's actually going to Vilnius next week, even though the summit was organized in the Baltic state, largely because it's very close to Ukraine and would make it relatively easy for Zelensky to attend. Zelensky is looking for more. He wants an assurance that Ukraine will be admitted into NATO more or less the day after the war ends. He wants a clear roadmap towards Ukraine's accession. He's called it a political membership of the alliance. But he knows that allies are still somewhat hesitant to make a commitment to a specific date. We don't know, of course, when the war is going to end. And of course, we also have to make sure that not only is Ukraine militarily interoperable with NATO and militarily ready to join the organization, but also, of course, has a secure democracy, particularly when it comes to the old bugbear of fighting corruption. But on the other hand, it's extremely important that the allies show that they are moving forward with Ukrainian membership, repeating that it's the objective, making clear that they are willing to keep supplying weapons to Ukraine to liberate its territory for as long as it takes. NATO itself is setting up a special fund to help Ukraine with things like interoperability, training, cyber defense, and the like. And the allies will hold the first meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council in Vilnius, showing Ukraine that its status has been upgraded. Stoltenberg has also come up with a good idea, which I think will be accepted, not to make Ukraine go through NATO's membership action plan, which could delay the process of enlargement once the war is over. Finland and Sweden have not had to go through this because NATO considered that they'd already made themselves interoperable with the alliance, and certainly at the end of the war, with all of the training and military assistance, Ukraine will be interoperable as well. So even if Zelensky may be frustrated that he doesn't get, if you like, a signed contract for a date for membership, there should be enough in the pot of good news in terms of Western support for his country to make him turn up in Vilnius. The French have an expression which is les absents ont toujours tort. Those who are not there are always in the wrong. And I think this would be also true on this particular occasion. Zelensky, of course, can also make the case that a Western democratic Ukraine in NATO with a powerful military force would also considerably assist NATO's defense vis-a-vis Russia, and Ukraine would be as much the protector of NATO in the future as it is today protected by NATO, or at least the NATO allies. The fourth issue, and I mentioned it briefly at the beginning, is Sweden waiting for Turkey and Hungary to ratify its membership of the alliance. There were many of us who were hoping that after the recent Turkish elections, President Erdogan would move on this as he moved on Finland's membership some months ago already. But Erdogan seems to want more from Sweden in terms of counter-terrorism actions and extraditions and so on. And it's now fairly clear that all of this is going to take a long time. But I think what is essential at the summit is that Sweden, NATO, and Turkey agree on a clear roadmap of what has to be done so that Sweden knows knows exactly what it needs to do, and Turkey makes a commitment not to add on extra demands at the last minute so that this dossier can move ahead quickly. Finally, there's the Indo-Pacific. Like in Madrid last year, 4 Asia-Pacific leaders from Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and South Korea will be coming to Vilnius. One of the things they'll do is agree on new individually tailored partnership programs, each of them with NATO, which will considerably reinforce their bilateral cooperation with the alliance in areas like maritime security, counter-terrorism, critical infrastructure protection, cyber defense, non-proliferation, energy security, emerging technologies, and the like. So NATO and the Indo-Pacific, in that sense, are coming closer. But NATO has also had the idea of opening a liaison office in Tokyo. Some allies think this is a good idea to improve NATO's situational awareness and coordination of these partnership programs. Others, like France, have expressed some hesitations that maybe this shows or sends the wrong political signal that NATO is about to sort of take on big responsibilities in the Indo-Pacific and could be seen as ganging up on China. So exactly what NATO says in Vilnius about how it sees its role in the Indo-Pacific, whether the office is open or not, and how NATO hopes to move forward in its strategy of dealing with China would also be a useful bonus. So it's not going to be boring. There's a lot to look out for. Watch this space and we'll see what the results are. But I hope you are happy that I gave you, dear faithful viewers, a sneak preview in this recording of the Eye. Take good care, have a good week, and I look forward to seeing you again on this virtual screen soon.